practitioner who has spent almost 20 years focusing entirely on real estate. I strive to provide professional service with personal attention both to your clients and to you. I look forward to working with you.
Hi, I'm Jim Slack with Advocate Insurance, your Medicare and senior insurance specialist. I help people with everything regarding to Medicare, including plan selection. So if you'd like a complimentary consultation, please call me at 815-666-6648. Thank you.
Hey, Carol with White Glove Building Inspections, your full service team since 1990. Give us a call, 630-428-4555. Make it great.
Joe Madrano from Loan Depot, and my goal is to be your trusted brand in mortgage lending, credit, and financing. I strive to provide my clients with timely and relevant information so that your clients can make powerful and informed decisions about both.
Carrington Title Partners is partnering with you to support realtors while providing a smooth, confident, and professional closing for your clients. Please go to carringtontitle.com to learn more about our agency program.
I've been the attorney for Three Rivers for over 20 years. I'm currently a major investor with RPEC. Our office works to close deals. Please allow us to work with you, and on behalf of your clients, please reach out at 815-725-7300. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christy Lister. Many of you know me, but I'm a mortgage lender at M&M Bank, and I'm here for all your mortgage needs. If you have any questions or your clients do, please don't hesitate to reach out. Enjoy your food for thought, and I look forward to getting to know everyone. Thank you and have a great day.
Hey guys, Ray Manuel here with National Title Solutions. We do the insurance for when you refinance or you sell your home. We're a proud affiliate for the Three Rivers Association, and we just want to give a shout out to all the realtors out there and all the other affiliates. I hope you guys are having a great new year. See you guys at the next event.
Do you want to get more buyers to the closing table? This is Scott Seaton, SLS Home Inspections. Are buyers stressed out when buying a new home? Of course they are. We are experts at stress reduction. Try us once and see the difference, or schedule online, slshomeinspections.com.
Are you a purple cow, or do you just blend in? Angle Drone Solutions has numerous ways to make you stand out, including our 3D tours and aerial photography and videography packages. Give us a call today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Becca Willie, and I'm the affiliates chair here at Three Rivers. Our committee is really excited to bring you guys today's food for thought. So today's food for thought is on floodplains. And before we get into it, I'm just going to announce a couple things going on at the association. July 19th is the membership breakfast, so please attend if you can. June 22nd is our annual golf outing. It's a lot of fun. New to Three Rivers, we are offering in person the accredited buyer representative designation. Typically that's something you guys can do online, but Three Rivers is now going to offer that in person. So if you're interested, there's a flyer in the back with dates. And then on Tuesday, we have Capital Conference. It's not too late to jump on the bus. I believe it leaves at 7:30 a.m. So you can still register if you want to take the bus down to Capital Conference and support Three Rivers with our advocacy at the state level. So we're very thankful to have you guys all here. If you want to grab some last minute breakfast, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to invite the sponsors that are here to the front of the room right now just to introduce themselves really quick, and then we'll get started. Come on. Joe, feel free to kick it off.
Ladies first.
Hi, I am Lisa Roushi, and I'm a solo real estate attorney. I'm based out of Shorewood. I have been a major donor. I have been the vice chair of the affiliates committee, the chair of the affiliates committee, and I seek to give my clients, my realtors, my lenders, professional service with personal attention.
Good morning, everybody. Joe Madrano from Loan Depot. The common question I'm getting asked a lot lately is, how do I get my buyers the attention to get their offers accepted? And what we're doing at Loan Depot is taking the loan application and fully vetting the income, assets, and credit, so it's fully pre-underwritten by a human underwriter. And you not only get a pre-approval letter, but you get a credit letter stating that they're already credit approved. Why is that an advantage? Because then it cuts down the closing time from 30 days to 15. Because when they go under contract, all we need is the appraisal, make sure that checks out, and then a clean title, and we're pretty much good to go. Joe Madrano with Loan Depot. Thank you.
And last but not least, Ron Engel from Engel Drone Solutions. So, have you ever wondered how you can stand out with your listings or your company? Photography and aerial photography can make a very large difference in how your website or your listing performs. And Engel Drone Solutions is now a full service provider of photography and aerial photography. If you're interested in something in those areas, chances are we're doing it. So again, my name is Ron Engel, and my company is Engel Drone Solutions. Thank you.
And I'm just gonna go really quickly. Becca Willie, Radon Express. My husband and I own a veteran-owned and operated radon mitigation company. So if you have any radon mitigation needs, feel free to give us a call. I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers. So first we have Marilyn Succo, who assists the community and professionals with floodplain management. And then we also have Jason Reha with Goosehead Insurance. So come on down.
All right. Do you want to go ahead and
Sure.
talk first?
So I should be sitting down, correct?
Okay. I can't
I know.
without standing
I'm
up.
kind of having
so-
I'll make it work. So my name is Jason Reha. I'm an independent insurance agent, a franchise owner of Goosehead Insurance. Long story short, they're a big franchise out of Texas. We opened up in Illinois in 2017. We were franchisee number 7. Now there's about 60 plus another 100 or so corporate agents, so growing rapidly. My wife and I run the agency. We are the only employees. That's the way we're going to keep it. And when we first got into this, you know, kind of like your worlds, there can be a lot of vanilla stuff. There's your vanilla home insurance, your vanilla auto insurance. We really wanted to separate ourselves, so we trained ourselves to be experts in the flood world and lending our expertise to realtors, lenders, attorneys who have clients who are potentially buying homes in flood zones. What we've come across this past 6 months is wonderful changes. Prior to December of last year, if clients were buying a home with a federally backed loan, they were forced to buy an NFIP/FEMA policy, which for the same coverage, 3 to 4 times more expensive, and the coverage is extremely limited. Since then, homebuyers are free to get to work with private flood insurance companies. We work with 8 of them, so we can shop the market for them and do what we do as a broker. And we love to come in and help, educate the client, sometimes the loan processor, and let them know that this is available to them, because they may not know, and if they don't know, it can kill a deal. I've done NFIP flood policies, the most expensive one I've ever done. This client paid about $8,000 a year. This is not a big, massive house. This is not a fancy house. She was just perfectly aligned for the flood gods to not like this property. But she loved the home, and it was still worth it to her. If she was buying this home tomorrow, I'd get that policy for her with probably more coverage for about $1,000. So massive difference. As you guys are working with your customers, there are options available. your retail storefront insurance provider, your State Farm, your Liberty Mutual, you know, the ones you see on TV every 30 seconds or so, they're really still only going to offer the NFIP policy. So guiding your clients to a broker like myself who can access the private market will be huge, not just for your client, but for you guys. I know you don't get paid until the closing takes place. So Marilyn is going to get into way more detail, being a true expert in this FEMA NFIP world. But I want to introduce myself. As you guys are coming across properties that your clients love, Bellwood, Plainfield, Oak Lawn are the three biggest high-risk flood zone areas that we come across. Don't hesitate to just call me, text me, email me. It takes me 30 seconds to run a flood quote. I can tell you what zone they're in. You're going to get into the zones, I'm assuming? Okay. And the key part is, Marilyn's going to describe it in more detail, but if it's a zone A, V, if it starts with those two letters, it's high risk. B, C, or X, low risk, no flood policy required. However, anyone can buy a flood policy. I have a flood policy. I'm in a low risk zone. They're very customizable. And because I'm in that low risk zone, it costs me next to nothing. So as an agency, my wife and I offer it to every single home buyer customer. They don't have to take it, but we do offer it to them. We run a flood zone determination for every one of them. We will tell them they're in a low risk zone 99.9% of the time. If they are in a higher risk zone and don't have a loan, for example, we will recommend the coverage. And if they say no, we will document that just to protect ourselves. And at least in the future, they know that they can come back to us and get it. One more key point. Like I said, let me know if you guys ever want flood zone determinations. It takes me 30 seconds. And at this point, we'll turn it over to Marilyn.
I have a question. What information do you need?
Very little. I don't even need their names.
An address, you probably just need.
Yeah, I'll do John or Jane Doe, an address. What's extremely helpful is a loan amount. And let me tell you why. Before I answer that question, who do we have in the room? If you're a realtor, got it, lender, attorney, and then other, got it. So, other, no, for the purposes of what we're doing. So, I'm big on getting the customer what they want. Some of you guys, so my question when it comes to flood, if they're in a high-risk flood zone, the first question I'm asking that potential home buyer is, are you buying flood insurance because you're being forced to by your lender, which creates a different scenario as far as how I'm going to guide them, or do you truly value this coverage and you don't mind paying what it would take to correctly insure you? If they want to just meet the loan requirements, we can look at higher deductibles. We can look at many ways to keep this cost down because they're only buying it for the piece of paper to get their loan closed and everyone's happy. So back to your question. Address, that's why I ask about the loan amount. So if the loan is $250, I never want them to only do this option, but I can try and do the coverage as close to $250 as possible without hurting them, and look at high deductible and get rid of some of the optional stuff. Okay. And we're going to do questions at the end. Okay. You're up, Marilyn.
So I am with the state of Illinois, and I work under a contract with FEMA. So my presentation is more heavily focused on the National Flood Insurance Program. But like I said, there is now private flood insurance out there. You would just have to look at each individual policy for their coverage. So, knee-deep in confusion. Flood insurance, floodplain management is confusing, and the maps are confusing. I don't know if you're able to see. Am I in your way?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
So basic terms, hopefully most of these you guys are familiar with. FEMA, of course, National Flood Insurance Program, I'll call it the NFIP. Flood insurance rate maps are the maps that determine whether a structure is in or out of the Zone A or Zone Vs that are the high-risk zones and have mandatory flood insurance requirement if there's a federally backed loan. I should amend this slide to add the V zones. Forgot about that. V zones are on Lake Michigan. Cook County got V zones last year, and Lake County on October 5th of 2023, the V zones for Lake County will go into effect. So those are the only places in Illinois that will have V zones because it represents velocity along a coastal zone. Base flood elevation is the elevation of the 1% annual chance flood, often horribly named the 100-year flood. It is a 1% annual chance flood. In typically a 30-year mortgage, life of a 30-year mortgage, the chance of flooding is 26%. That is really the statistics that should be given to people. If you are within that 1% annual chance floodplain, your risk of flooding in 30 years is 26%. Elevation certificate, hopefully, or many of you may be familiar with that. It is a form used to communicate with the flood insurance program, the National Flood Insurance Program, and I'm assuming private carriers as well, the specific elevation details about a property so that they can make the most accurate quote. And then finally, a letter of map amendment is a form that can be, it's a letter issued by FEMA that amends the flood insurance rate map and corrects it if more localized, detailed topography or elevation information can show that the map is incorrect. The flood insurance rate maps are to a scale of typically 1 inch equals 500 feet or more. They use 1 foot contour now, but old maps were using 2 foot or even 5 foot contour interval maps. So the accuracy wasn't there and can't be there on a lot by lot basis. So there are times that a homeowner can provide details about their particular property to remove the structure, the house, from the designation of being in the Zone A or V. So who can buy flood insurance? We've kind of already said this. Anyone can buy a private flood insurance policy. Anyone. Doesn't matter where they live in the United States. For an NFIP policy, they just have to live in a community that is and been enrolled in the NFIP. In the 6-collar county area, I think there's 2 or 3 communities out of all the 6 counties that are not members. And one of them, I believe, is Oak Park, and it's because they literally have not a single square foot of floodplain designated in their town.
Berwyn too.
Berwyn?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you sure about that?
I am. It's so weird. I would think
I'll have to double check that with you. Yeah. So, anyway, very few communities. Generally, when a community, we have roughly 100 communities in Illinois that are not members across the state that have some floodplain, but they're generally speaking rural communities, and maybe it just touches on some undeveloped land within their corporate boundary. There's no house nearby, or the wastewater treatment plant is in the floodplain. So, in general, Illinois is fully covered. We have 897 NFIP communities in the state, so pretty good. So the NFIP is a voluntary program. Communities, so the federal government offers the flood insurance to property owners, businesses, and renters. No one can be declined coverage under the NFIP if their community is in the program. Of course, the cost can be very high, but no one can be declined coverage. No one loses coverage after filing multiple claims. So once you're in the NFIP, you can maintain your policy as long as you pay your annual premium. The flood insurance program provides the flood insurance maps, and there is disaster assistance available through FEMA when a community is in the NFIP for damages in floodplains. Downstate, there's a community that left the National Flood Insurance Program because they didn't want to enforce their regulations. That community flooded, had large damage to a sanitary sewer, and they could get $0 from FEMA to repair that sanitary sewer because it's located in the floodplain. They do get other disaster assistance, say a tornado hit and structures outside the floodplain were damaged or infrastructure was damaged. But in the floodplain, a community must be in the NFIP. So it is serious, especially if a community has a lot of floodplain, that we expect them to enforce their regulations. So a community must adopt the hazard maps and the flood insurance study, and then adopt regulations, and then enforce those regulations. So as with anything in insurance, they're going to define what they're going to cover. So there is a formal definition for a flood in the NFIP. It is a general or temporary condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres. So it could be one property as long as 2 or more acres of that property was flooded, or 2 or more properties. And that could be your property and the right-of-way. Doesn't have to be 2 privately owned properties. It could be a public right-of-way and your property. From overland inland flow, unusual rapid accumulation of surface waters, such as if there was an ice jam on the Kankakee River, Rock River has ice jams, and there's a sudden rapid increase in water. And then mud flows, and that's typically more out in California. Not landslides, but a mud flow, actually like a river of mud. So the first bullet point there is critical to note. It is defined by an overflow of inland water. It should be overland flow. So it's got to be overland. If a basement floods due to a sump pump failure, sanitary backup, cracks in the foundation, none of that is covered by a National Flood Insurance Program policy. The water must come over the surface into the home, flow into the home through a window well, flow into the home by coming like into the first floor, flow over a foundation and down and filling a basement. But it cannot come through groundwater. Now, is there localized flooding? Is the ground saturated? Is water coming into the home because of the ground being saturated? Yes, but it is not defined as a flood in the NFIP. And then there's another option, collapsed subsidence. So for example, when I think it was Lake Delavan, there was a lake with a dam in Wisconsin that broke about 10 years ago, and sudden flood of water came downstream from that dam and a house collapsed in. That would be an example. There's been dams breaking in Michigan recently. Unlike continuous erosion that happens over time along Lake Michigan and eventually a house collapses in, that would not be related to a flood. It has to be more of a single event. So I need to update this slide. We're up to 897 participating communities now. Again, policy can be issued anywhere in an NFIP communities. Policies are based on many factors now. I apologize. Risk rating 2.0 is the new name for flood insurance premium setting. All right, I'm not going to find it. And so I'm going to go into the changes in flood insurance. If you ever knew anything about the National Flood Insurance Program, you can just forget it, because under this new risk rating 2.0, it's all different. So basically, a few years back, FEMA was told by Congress, you must make the flood insurance program actuarial. You can no longer subsidize flood insurance. Hence the reason flood insurance policies under the NFIP have skyrocketed. I'm sure the congressional people who have live in coastal states had no idea what was coming to the residents along the coastal states of the United States. The maximum a policy is for residential is $12,000 and change, like $12,250 or something. That's the most anyone can pay. Because if they really actually did actuarial on some of those homes along Florida or the Carolinas or Georgia or whatever, they'd probably be paying more like $40,000. So, but they did cap it. Renters can get coverage. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. We really, regardless of whether the owner of the property has coverage, renters can get coverage for their contents. And a secondary home has faster increases in premiums until a home reaches its actuarial full rate. They are increasing at 18% a year. But if it's a secondary home, like a lakefront home, a vacation home, or a rental home, it can increase at 25% a year until it gets up to full actuarial rates. When can I file an NFIP claim? Again, I talk about water coming over window wells, over foundations, through a doorway or window. Flood insurance doesn't pay for subsurface flooding. Coverage in the basement is what's the most limited. And so here's just a list of what is covered as far as under a building policy, which is all a lender is required to make someone carry as a building only policy. If they have contents coverage, that's the limit of what's covered for contents in the basement. So no carpeting, no furniture, if they have a bedroom down there or TV room, none of that would be covered. Summary of NFIP insurance versus homeowner coverage. Bottom line is, typical homeowner's coverage, and you guys all know this, doesn't cover a flood. They would have to add the extra coverage for sump pump failure or sanitary backup, but it will not cover a flood. Now, one of the things I've got stated here is structural and contents coverage sold separately under the NFIP. Limited basement coverage can't be canceled. I've said that. It used to be that premiums would not increase based on claims history. That did change. So now, as people file more claims, the NFIP will not cancel your policy, but the premiums now will increase if you have filed claims. Again, residential annual increase is 18% per federal statute. So again, Congress told FEMA, stop subsidizing flood insurance. So how does it work? It's confusing. They can insure any property with 2 or more rigid walls and a fully secured roof, permanently fixed to a site. So a mobile home, RV, not mobile home, an RV. An RV is not permanently affixed to a site, so they can't get coverage for that. Someone apparently tried to ask for a flood insurance policy for a open-aired stadium. It doesn't have a fixed roof, it can't get a flood insurance policy. So it's got to have 4 walls, be fixed to the site, so a mobile home, manufactured home is tied down to a site, that is fixed to a site, that can get coverage.
So Soldier Field can't get a flood insurance policy.
Correct.
Yeah, but the covered fields?
A covered field could.
Huh.
Hopefully they wouldn't build something that expensive in a flood zone, but I don't know what's happening. I don't know where.
Can you build in a floodplain? I thought after a certain year you couldn't build.
Oh,
in Illinois.
sure, you can. Just has to be elevated. But the bigger problem is, I haven't looked at any maps of Miami, but, you know, considering half of Miami is, or more, is probably gonna
I'm
be.
talking about Illinois.
Yeah, in the
I haven't
floodplain.
moved to Florida yet.
So the problem is, floodplain maps change, risk changes. So, you know, as we keep losing, South or Antarctica, flood levels keep rising, in the Gulf. So I know it doesn't quite make sense, but, glaciers melting in Antarctica flood the US coastline worse. So, so eventually more and more areas become, mapped as floodplain, and therefore they end up becoming built-in floodplain in the future. So we've kind of mentioned this, buildings in the mapped floodplain that have, the building is used as security for a federally backed loan. That is who's required to carry a policy. So like he mentioned, some people choose to carry policies because they know they're at risk. So they can make choices on how much coverage they're going to have. But if you actually have a loan and you live in a mapped floodplain, it's either the outstanding principal balance of the loan, hence his desire to know how much the loan amount's going to be, the maximum amount of insurance available under the NFIP, which is residential is $250,000 and non-residential is $500,000. Congress hasn't changed this since they created this in like 1972. So unfortunately, they're 50 years behind the times. Condos are based on the number of units, so that can change. Do you have a quick question?
No.
Oh, okay. I looked up, I saw a hand moving. So here's one of the big changes. In the past, if you've ever helped someone with a house in a floodplain, you were often asked by an agent, do they have an elevation certificate? Before, it used to only be required for newly built homes, essentially after 1980. Most insurance agents just asked for it anyway, not realizing, because most of them don't understand flood insurance, and they just like read down a form and they don't look at the fine print. So they would ask for an elevation certificate. But now it's not required. If someone has an elevation certificate, it will help them get the most accurate quote, but it's no longer required. But now on the form, there's a section E that says that it's only applicable in 2 flood zones. It is now applicable for every homeowner. So anyone can complete the form themselves or work with someone else who understands it more to help them fill it out. It's basically someone taking a measuring tape.
I can't see, I'm sorry.
You can't see this?
Yeah. Thank you.
So they basically need a measuring tape in order to take the measurements needed. We have a lot more information available, which is how the flood insurance program is setting up better, more specific premiums for each house. They can use, street view, count the steps up to the front door. There's more topographic information across the whole country that they can use. So there's just a lot better data that they're using now to give specific information. So if a homeowner doesn't need to have a surveyor to go out with a survey rod and get elevations, they can now just take measurements from the ground and they'll make decisions on their flood insurance.
That sounds accurate.
Yeah. So the thing is, an elevation certificate can run, usually the cheapest I've heard now is $1,000, but if you have a house that's off the beaten path, it can be $2,000–3,000. So if you live in an urban area like Will County, DuPage County, the whole state of Illinois has 2-foot contour LIDAR. So they've flown the entire state. It's every year, 2 or 3 counties get updated. That is available on the from the Illinois Geological Society. So the people who are working with FEMA now to make these flood quotes, they have access to all that. And in DuPage County, when they were starting with this information and coming out and people were surveying, I had surveyors tell me that they are within 1/10 of a foot of every elevation that they have ever seen on the DuPage County maps. So it is extremely accurate LIDAR. It can get inaccurate as you get immediately adjacent to a building or if there's a heavy amount of tree cover, but for the most part, it's incredibly accurate data. So that's what's being used. So if you can go at your house and take your own measurements from like the depth of your basement floor to the outside grade, they can get pretty close to what your elevations are. Okay, there is more information about Risk Rating 2.0 on the internet. You can just Google FEMA Risk Rating 2.0 if you want to understand it more. As far as flood insurance premiums, it used to be I am in the shaded area, the X zone or the A zone or the V zone, I'm going to pay a high flood insurance premium. But if I'm immediately outside of that line, it was like a black and white scenario. I'm either in the floodplain or I'm out of the floodplain. If I'm out of the floodplain, I'm paying $700 a year, whereas my neighbor who is immediately across the street and maybe a few tenths of a foot lower than me in elevation is going to be paying $3,000 a year. So the new program is it's kind of all shades of gray. Yes, that house is in that 1% annual risk floodplain, but FEMA said, wait a minute, 40% of our claims are from people who live outside of that 1% annual risk floodplain. So clearly, there's a lot of risk happening immediately adjacent to that. And so now there's more of these shades of gray. So that $3,000 policy might be here, and then right across the street, maybe that quote's going to be $2,700. Might be a little less, but it's not going to be a lot less now.
I'm sorry, you said that there's basically a line that divides those two floodplains?
I will show you a map.
Is that determined with the elevation certificate then?
No. So I will show you, let's see if I can get to a map quickly, and then I'll come back. So here's a flood insurance rate map. So you see the blue shaded area, and this is in Minooka. This is a Will County map. I don't know if I can get over there. So you basically have your line here that defines the limits of the floodplain. They would have used 1 foot or probably 2 foot contour maps to generate this line. But it is pretty detailed now, and now we have aerial photography underneath it. But if this house right here, or building, it looks like there's a building right here, is right on that line, that would be defined as being in the floodplain. Now, could there be some high ground that comes around that building? Absolutely. That building could be out by a few tenths. But is it really as low a risk as maybe a building that would be over here or like over here? This could be a good 3 or 4 feet higher than that floodplain elevation, whereas that might only be a few tenths. So with an elevation certificate, they could get a letter of map amendment that removes them if they are on high ground and are above this floodplain elevation. But otherwise, they would be written a policy if they chose to get one that would still be pretty high because they're just so close to the floodplain. So I'm going to go.
So that building structure that says Zone AE, that is not in the flood?
There's a leader line that's pointing to this. So this,
okay.
yeah, this is the AE floodplain, and this is a Zone A floodplain that stretches up here, which means there's no defined elevation for this one. I'm guessing it's a detention basin area, it was connected to the stream. It picks up on topography that is gonna be flooded by this. But based on some rules that FEMA has for mapping, they can't define the elevation, but essentially it's gonna be the same elevation as the floodplain here.
And the outer building behind the Zone A is not?
Like
That one, yeah.
Yeah, so that's out, it's in this area here, it's a Zone X is what this area is. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to go back quickly. So new factors for premiums are things like distance to the flooding source or the coast. Is it coastal flooding versus riverine flooding versus Great Lakes flooding? Height above the local area. So if you're the lowest house on the block, you're going to pay more than someone on the highest house on the block. They really are zeroing in on more finer details of flood risk than they ever have before. Replacement, this is the biggest, a very big change for people to make the flood insurance more, what's the word I want to say? Help people in lower income areas. Replacement cost of homes are now considered. Before, if I had a $200,000 policy on a $1 million or $250,000 policy on a $1 million home versus someone who literally had like a $300,000 home and also had a $250,000 policy, they would be paying the same premium. Now they're finally recognizing a foot of water in a home that's replacement cost is $1 million is going to be a much bigger claim for damages than a foot of water in a $300,000 home. So that is, and equity. They're trying to be more equitable. So, so that's just part of the consideration. Community rating system discount program. We do have 72 communities in Illinois that are part of that program. It does give insurance discounts. Don't have a lot of participation in Will County. Trying to think who in this area. Like Calumet City, Lansing, South Holland. I can't think of Orland. Yeah, Orland Hills. Those are some communities, Midlothian, but Will County just doesn't have the participation. I don't know if any community in Will County is a member. More changes, construction type, foundation type, ground elevation, first floor height is now being considered. If it's a ranch home versus a two-story home, the ranch home's going to pay more because, of course, more damage is going to happen with a foot of water than a two-story home with that same foot of water. Okay. This just shows, I'm going to skip this. I don't think it really matters. Just reminder again, NFIP does not cover personal belongings or improvements in a basement. So basically you have a stream, normal stream flow, floodplain, you're going to have the water rise and spread out across the floodplain. Sometimes, has anyone ever heard the word floodway? Okay. It's not the same as floodplain. It's the portion of the floodplain that the water is deeper and has a higher velocity. That is where in Illinois, in northeastern Illinois, we are extremely restrictive. So no new buildings, primary buildings, no new primary buildings can be built in a floodway. If someone already lives in the floodway, already has a home in the floodway, they can add an accessory structure, but that's it. It's limited to 500 square feet in size. And not always will it be allowed, but many times it will.
Could you just scoot over a smidgen? Thank you. Thanks.
So, everyone here remember the Plainfield tornado? So prior to the Plainfield tornado, the state law said no new buildings, or if your building was damaged, you couldn't replace it in the floodway. Well, then the Plainfield tornado happened, and not only did people lose family members and they lost all their homes, they were then told they couldn't rebuild those homes. So the law changed. So even if a home is demolished or destroyed in a floodplain, floodway, it may be rebuilt. It just has to be elevated without a basement, which of course is tough when you just survived a tornado by living in your basement, and now we tell you can only replace it, but you just can't have a basement.
Build it
So
and sell it.
build it, and then make sure you have a storm shelter as well. So, all right. So we did look at this map. The areas outside of that blue shaded area is what's called either a shaded X zone or an X zone. The shaded X is a 500-year or a 0.2% annual chance floodplain, and only comes into play if somebody wants to build a critical facility like a hospital or something. This is the way the maps look today in Will County, so they're just much easier to read. So we have the X zone is the black and white photo. The next layer that you see is that tan orangey color. That's that 500-year. Then the blue shaded area is the flood, part of the floodplain. We call it the flood fringe. And then the red and blue crosshatched is the floodway. So people can build in that blue shaded area. Just has to be elevated, no basement. They are allowed to build.
How far out of the floodplain do you need to be with the building?
So the key would be elevation, and in general in Will County, it's 1 foot. Some areas, some communities choose 2 feet or 3 feet, depending on.
And that's where you have to have at least 2 walls that are open for ingress and egress, is that right?
No. So let's say you want to build an elevated home in the floodplain. If you don't just build it on an open foundation for flow through, you have to have flood openings. And there's insulated ones out there. They close shut when there's no flood water. They just look like a silver rectangle, like in a concrete block foundation, for example. So they perfectly fit where a concrete block is. And then during a flood, they flip. Alternatively, they can use just openings with some kind of screening over it to prevent critters from getting in and out. Of course, they don't have the insulation factor then if they don't use the engineered vents that are insulated. Here's another example of a floodplain map through downtown Downers Grove. So, is a property in the floodplain or not? The 2 online sources are the FEMA Map Service Center or the National Flood Hazard Layer Viewer. If you go to the FEMA Map Service Center, you can just type in an address, and it takes you there. It'll give you a picture, and it'll say, hey, go to NFHL Viewer, and then you can click on that, and it links you right to the NFHL Viewer. It is a ArcGIS product. I don't know if, I think I show some examples of it. Oh, so here's the Flood Map Service Center. So you can just type in an address. This is a search all products option. That's a little more difficult. This is what you would see if you just type in an address and hit search. And then here's an example I have from Peoria City. Do all you guys work in Will County? Just, okay. All over, but in the 6-color area. So some areas of the state don't have digital maps yet, but you have to go a little bit further south not to have digital maps. So I'm going to skip that. So here's an example from Joliet. type in an address, and it puts a little red pin there, and then you can, it's kind of hard to see, but right here it says go to the NFHL viewer, so you can click right on that and go straight to that map. Otherwise, you can actually go here and do a map image, and it will take you in through that as well. So this is what happens when you're on the National Flood Hazard Layer viewer. There's that location of that house. It is shown to be in the blue area, so that is in the 1% annual chance flood or the base flood. And then, up in the top right corner of the National Flood Hazard Layer viewer, there's a stack of papers, and that's the layers. So there's all kinds of extra information on there, but they're not going to populate that initially, because then the map would never show up until you zoom in closer to your address. So you click on a little gray area next to NFHL viewer, and it drops down everything you have an option to look for there. And there is an option there called LOMAs, Letters of Map Amendment. You open that up and you will see all these purple dots appear. And everyone, you should get a copy of this. I gave a PDF copy of this presentation, so hopefully they can provide you a copy. So when you open that up and you look back at that house that we were looking at, there's a purple dot on it. You can click on that purple dot and you can open that letter. So this is just an explanation again. LOMAs are for when you want to correct a map. So in this area of Joliet, it's very shallow flooding. So the flood depth might only be 6 inches or 8 inches. So it is kind of an area-wide flooding, but the individual houses can sit on little islands of higher ground. You're not going to have that ability in a map like this to show each one of those houses as ringed out. They're going to show the floodplain stretching the whole neighborhood, and then the individuals have to get these letters of map amendment to remove themselves from the floodplain.
So are you saying that you can apply for a LOMA without an actual elevation?
No. I have. So to get a LOMA, you need that elevation certificate.
If you're interested, I have a LOMA, a policy, and elevation cert. Actually, here, if you need an example.
Well, I will. I'm not going to show an actual elevation certificate, but I am showing some LOMAs. So this person then applies to FEMA and can get a letter of map amendment. And so here's an example of one in Joliet on Dover Street. In this case, they actually removed the entire property. They provided not an elevation certificate, but an elevation form that said the lowest lot grade was higher than the flood elevation, so it removed the entire property from the floodplain, which is, of course, a good idea if you ever want to do an addition or swimming pool or something else on the property. Here's another example of a house, and it's at 717 East Cass Street in Joliet. And in this case, there are multiple buildings, and the south building was removed. So it specifies which building on the property was removed.
Obviously, these are all forms that somebody has to procure and process. What is the cost?
So to get a letter of map amendment from FEMA is free.
Okay.
To provide the information to them to get the letter of map amendment requires the elevation certificate, and the elevation certificate will cost someone at least $1,000.
Okay.
There is, of course, caveats to everything. There is an option to submit topographic information from a computer GIS, geographic information system, to get removed, and then an elevation certificate isn't required. In that case, you have to be out by at least 2 feet. So let's say someone lives along a river. I've got this situation downstate or in Kendall County right now. They are 20 feet above the floodplain elevation. The problem is they're on a really steep slope. And so the map shows them as being in. They can submit contour mapping from the county needs to help them put it together on a exhibit for them saying the source of the data. They don't need an elevation certificate. They're so high they can use a contour map. But if you're within inches of the floodplain or less than a foot from that flood elevation, you're going to have to use an elevation certificate.
So their driveway may be in the flood zone, that doesn't matter?
Correct, it's just the house.
Just the house, okay.
So you can get the house removed, just the structure itself. The garage could be in, for example. And usually lenders just care about, skip that one. Lenders just care about the primary structure. One of the other things that happens, I'm going to go back to a slide back here on Joliet. I don't know that any of you can read this, but Will County got new maps in 2018. Some of these letters of map amendment date back to 2010. So that is before the new maps. So there are times you may hear from someone that you're selling a house for and they say, well, I had a letter of map amendment. And you go to look at this map and it doesn't show anymore. If it doesn't show anymore on this map, you can contact me. I can research it. But it's possible that it wasn't revalidated. So what'll happen is that letter of map amendment got issued in 2010. A new flood insurance map comes out in 2018, and they restudied the stream, and the flood elevation went a foot higher, and that letter of map amendment is not valid anymore. The ground is too low. I'm getting a trip over here. So if you ever run into a situation where someone tells you, but I had one, and they may even hand you it physically, but you look it up and it doesn't show up, it's got to be on this revalidation letter. And unfortunately, communities don't confirm these lists. They get new maps issued, and there are some areas like Joliet probably has 100 revalidations. So someone needed to sit down, and when they got a letter from FEMA saying, we propose in their new maps, we're going to revalidate 80 of these letters and 20 of them are not going to be revalidated, someone from Joliet needed to go through them, and someone from Joliet needed to make sure, oh shoot, we have 102, you're missing 2. Because somewhere in the paperwork since the 1980s, 2 of them got misplaced. Does every community do that? No. Be right honest with you. Don't know anything about Joliet. Don't know if they did it, but I know communities aren't checking these lists. And then years later, someone comes back and says, what happened? And in some cases, I did this in Peatone. We found the letter, we sent it back to FEMA, and they reissued it. So it was a mistake. And FEMA's like, yep, should have been revalidated, and they reissued that letter. But most of the time, it's just not revalidated because the flood elevation went higher.
If the map, the flood map changed in 2018, do the owner get a letter telling them?
No.
Would the lender get a letter?
So, if a flood map changes and a house now is designated in the floodplain, lenders are supposed to be checking their portfolio, and lenders are notified that maps are changing in this county, and if they have loans in their portfolio, they should be checking it. So most of them do like an annual contract with these flood determination firms, and so they do track that. It can be about 6 months to a year maybe before it catches up, and then the lender informs them.
I had an instance where the insurance company was notified that the homeowner's insurance company was notified and contacted the homeowner.
Okay.
It was just kind of a surprise to them.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that happened, but
I live on the DuPage River, and when I purchased the home, the house was in X, right? I did not require flood insurance, but seeing that the river was 40 feet from my back door, I bought a policy anyway. So it was pretty reasonably priced, $400 or $500 a year, cheap insurance for peace of mind.
Yeah, yeah.
When, and it is all about elevation. Back in 2000, I want to say 13 maybe, we had a pretty, it was a historic flood. So the DuPage runs about
April 18th, 2013. We just had the anniversary 2 days ago.
I watched, because my house is very up high, so when they built the house, he backfilled a lot. They only had to dig like 3 feet in to make the basement. So, long story short, I saw the water coming up, and I think it crested at like 11.6, and usually it runs at like 2 feet, you know, over there in Shorewood.
Yeah.
And I emptied the basement out just in case, but I didn't get any water, although the neighbors were all emptying all the wet crap out of their basement. And so the water literally ran around there was water in the cul-de-sac, you know, and whatnot. But anyways, in 2018, when they did the D-firms and they redid the floodplain maps, I got letters saying, ding, 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 you're in AE. And I went, and I looked at the picture, and it looked like the same picture that I had seen before. That little blue line just touched my deck. It didn't even touch the house. Just touched the deck. So I went through the whole, I got the elevation certificate. I had Stamika, he was a surveyor that was familiar with dealing with FEMA, whatever have you.
Mhm.
I got my letter of map amendment, and I got my structure removed. But now I got a flood insurance. Now I've got flood insurance through American Bankers Insurance. Okay, which I don't know. Is that an NFIP program or is that private insurance?
Probably
right?
private. Heard of that.
So the question that I had when you were talking about rates, it says coverage and rate, and it says FEMA rating engine, and then it's got.
So it is an NFIP policy. Is that brand, how long have you had that policy?
I'm gonna, can I give it to you?
How long
Tell
have
me,
you had
because
it?
this is the part that scares me, where it says this, and then it says, annual increase cap discount. Does that mean my flood insurance is gonna be $5,500?
Yes, so the new policies, I should ask you to send me a copy of this, and then I'll black out all your personal. Black out.
Yeah, give me your email.
Yeah, you black out, like if you wanna black out everything and then send it to me. So the way the new policies are, so he's got $250,000 maximum coverage for the building, $100,000 for contents, and then he set his deductibles pretty low. So his full risk premium, these will tell you the full risk, is $5,557,000. $5,557, sorry. Yeah. So, but you had a policy before you became into the floodplain at $652. So now you're going to start climbing at 18% a year. You're on what's called the glide path. So he will continue going up at 18% a year until it reaches $5,557.
Even though I have a letter of map amendment.
Right,
taking my
because
property
it
out.
doesn't matter anymore. That only matters if someone wants to get out of the mandatory requirement. That says you're not in the floodplain anymore, mandatory coverage is not required. But now, when a flood insurance premium is quoted, it's all shades of gray. How close are you to the floodplain? You're still really close. So your $600 $250 policy is gone. You now, full risk is 5,000 because you're too close to that floodplain.
So when you said that it would go up 18%, so every year it's gonna go up 18% from the 5,500?
Up to
From the $650. Yeah,
Until it gets to the 55.
right,
Until it hits what?
The 5,500.
Okay.
5,500.
But the maximum premium anybody can have is 12,500, right?
12,000 and something. It's like, I can't remember, it's 12,250 or 12,500, something like that. So yeah, and then on every policy now, there's other fees and surcharges. So he has an additional $200 of surcharges. It's, I guess it's like 190 of surcharges. So that's automatic. He's automatically getting that charged. But yeah, you're going to keep going up at 18%.
So my letter of amendment is useless, apparently.
That allows you not to have mandatory coverage. So you could look at your risk and say, where is my first floor compared to that flood height? Is my primary risk the basement? Instead of having a $250,000 policy and $100,000 content, you could drop it down and have $75,000 for the basement and $30,000 for contents, and have a $10,000 deductible, $5,000 deductible, something like that. So you have the ability to decide how much coverage you want and kind of look at your risk. One thing that's interesting, and you're an insurance agent, and you guys probably all understand this more than me. I understand you're always supposed to have at least 80% coverage of what the value is of your home for your policy.
Or have full replacement.
Or have full replacement. But one thing that I personally have noticed in helping people with flood insurance after flooding is I've never seen any of their proof of loss statements saying your loss was $80,000 and because you didn't have that full coverage, this is under the NFIP, we're gonna slash your, loss coverage to less. I haven't seen that.
The actual cash value?
Yeah.
I haven't come across it either.
So
Thankfully.
I don't know if the NFIP is gonna change that now under risk rating 2.0. So I can't say,
When
but
did that risk rating 2.0 come into effect?
it started basically 2 years ago.
It was passed 2 years ago?
Yeah, and it's been,
Yeah, right
I think,
here.
by April
check
of
hard on
this
my way out.
year, everyone's policies should have been converted to the risk rating 2.0.
So for basements, it really doesn't matter because they're not gonna cover much anyway, right?
Correct.
So you should just have a basement thing on
So
your
the,
regular.
right, so, but of
Right.
course, like, the reason I know the date of April 18th, 2013, besides the fact that I know all the other flood dates in Illinois for the last 30 years, but I worked for the village of Lisle after that flood. The day of that flood, it was a Wednesday. I'm sure all of you remember exactly where you were that day. I had fallen asleep on my couch at 2 in the morning and knew rain wasn't stopping, but my son's senior party at Naperville Central was that Friday, they had a lock-in, I guess it was Saturday into Sunday morning, and I was in charge of feeding 700 kids, so I was really busy. And so that morning I got up, tried to drive my kids to the high school, saw the water running across Washington Street in Illinois as I was heading north, and I called my kids in and I said, I'm not bringing my children to school today because it's going to flood. And I proceeded back home, and then all hell broke loose, and everything flooded, and kids were stranded at the high school that couldn't get to their cars. So Lisle, Illinois, massive flooding, and homes had 3 feet of water in their first floors. So you shouldn't downgrade your chosen flood insurance policy if you are at risk of having first floor flooding. But if your house sits high and your main primary risk is the basement, you have a Loma, your neighbors clearly had basement flooding. Well, I don't know why, if their sump pumps failed, what happened. Do you have a generator or backup power for your sump
I'm
pump?
just higher than everybody.
You're just higher. So, you know, he just sits at higher ground and has less risk than his neighbors who have their basements a few feet lower.
The guy that built the house, like I said, they backfilled a lot.
Yeah.
Built. So I'm literally, if you sit in the cul-de-sac, you'll see my house sits higher.
Yeah, so.
I live in a area where my neighborhood, I'm at the lowest part where the whole neighborhood drains behind my home. And it's like a deep retention ditch back there that was not fortified, so I took it upon myself, we fortified it with stones and stuff like that. But in 95 or 6, it did
Probably
flood.
July of 96?
Yes,
Yeah.
and it came across the land, I have a pond in the yard, and it came literally across the land where the fish you could see running across the street into the basement windows. We're still classified as X, and every year I keep wondering, should I get flood insurance? Because we are at the lowest point.
Okay, so here's my other question. Could you build up the ground around that window well? Could you build a extra wall around that window well? Like, how deep was the water when it flowed into that window well?
It wasn't that deep, I think it was maybe 6 inches.
Yeah, so you could build a wall around it.
Build something so it doesn't, and then that
Yeah.
take care of it.
My mom's house sits really low, so we have the house here, we came out 18 inches. I built up a retaining wall and then sloped the ground away from that retaining wall. So now there's a little pocket, because you don't want to cover the foundation, you got to let it breathe where the brick and the foundation meet. But I came out, built the wall, it's like a reverse retaining wall. You don't see the retaining wall is on the back side of the dirt.
Okay.
And then I just landscape, put shrubs, nobody knows it's there. But it's a way to protect that foundation from water.
And did you hire a landscaping company to do
No, I
it?
did it myself. But,
If you do have a finished basement and you want to cover it, is the cost increasing severely to get it covered for the flooding?
yeah, I mean, in the NFIP, he has some private, companies that are out there. So I personally don't understand why every mortgage in the United States isn't required flood insurance. The risk of flooding is so high in the United States compared to your house catching fire. But yet they require you. Now, the difference is the house catches fire, it's typically a total loss. So lenders are concerned with that. But especially in Florida, I mean, we know what's happened down there. All those insurance companies are leaving the state, and now the state has to carry all those people. And so the state of Florida is requiring everyone to have flood insurance. It's something, if you have a state insurance policy or something, it
Thank
must
God I
have
don't
flood
have to know.
coverage.
I thank God I don't have to know.
Yeah.
That state,
Yeah. I'd never move to Florida.
Well, thank God they
Yes.
have that for people. They
Yeah.
can have it. 'Cause
Yeah.
There are a
We've
lot
got a
of people that
condo
are,
in Florida,
that they have
triple
to.
insurance.
Well, and that's part of it. Illinois has been subsidizing the Florida and Texas policyholders for years. So,
That's why our premiums have gone up so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. I mean, you build a house on a $5 million house on the beach.
Yep.
Yeah.
Stupid.
And you wonder why it floods.
So I have a question.
Blows away.
How does the insurance or the coverage work for downtown lakefront properties that are right on Lake Michigan?
So for the most part, there's not many buildings right on the lakefront that are in the flood zone. They do sit up higher. There are a couple condos that recently got mapped in because of these V zones, velocity zones, because we have the wave run-up happening and the water is coming over like seawalls and flooding.
Because there's 2 points. There's Hollywood, all the way at the end, Hollywood, and then all the way at the end, South Shore.
Yeah,
East of 31st Street.
I do not know Chicago that well, but I just know there are some condo buildings that have recently come into flood insurance.
Okay.
And
Because they're right at that retaining, you know,
yes,
the rocks and then the retaining
yeah,
wall.
and it's expensive. It's very expensive.
So would renters, in that scenario, would renters?
A renter doesn't have a mortgage. The owners of the units are the ones paying, and the condo association has to have a policy for the building, and then the individual unit owners have to carry separate policies themselves.
Not flood. Yeah.
Flood. No.
No flood.
No. Only the condo association covers flood. You can't have individual ones. Not in a condo.
No.
You can for
no,
your
they
personal
can.
property, your
Yeah,
condos.
Okay.
they carry.
We don't require it as a lender. We require the condo association to have it.
Yeah, so the condo association, I have heard lenders requiring individual condo owners to carry it for their contents. Depending
That's not
on
an
where
agency
they're,
requirement.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't believe that's an agency requirement. Like for Fannie
Or
and
a
Freddie
FEMA.
for contents.
Yeah.
They just need to have flood, I believe.
They need to
unless
have
that's changed.
coverage for the,
Well, you have to have HO6 insurance, but you don't have to have flood insurance individually.
I've seen it go both ways.
I know that when FEMA's flood insurance liaison spoke to people in that condo building, he discussed individual policies for the individual owners, in addition to the condo association having it for all the common space.
I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
That we lenders.
I'll get your card from you, because FEMA's flood insurance liaison, he is absolutely incredible. We are so lucky to have him in Region 5. His name is James Sink, and he can give us the answer. So one quick thing to point out, sometimes people apply for a letter or map amendment. They get this form. It looks like they got the letter or map amendment, but it's a denial. And it says up in the top right corner, Loma-DEN. And then when you read the middle bold block, it says outcome, what is not removed from the special flood
So it
hazard
doesn't
waiver.
have that big thing up there that you have?
No.
Maybe they should read
No.
their font size.
Right. So I have homeowners come to me and say, I got a Loma, and I'm thinking, how did you get a Loma? There's no way. And then I read this. What amazes me and is so frustrating, so in this case, you can't read it probably, but the difference is 0.4 feet. So the flood elevation was 515, and their lowest adjacent grade, the lowest ground next to their foundation, was 514.6. So they were 0.4 of a foot in. I had a homeowner in Lisle submit. They were 1/10 of a foot, so 1.2 inches. That surveyor might have picked a point where the downspout had eroded the ground next to the foundations. You know, I had a house in Glen Ellen where the owner bought it as a foreclosure, after a foreclosure, and the downspout had broken off the back of the house 10 feet up. So for years, water was pouring, and there was this massive hole next to the foundation. If someone would have gotten an elevation certificate, because the floodplain was right next to that building, in a golf course behind the building, that surveyor justly would have put the survey rod, that's the lowest point. I told the homeowner, you need to get an elevation certificate, you need to get a letter of map amendment. It is okay for you to backfill this hole.
Yeah, so if someone doesn't fall in, he gets.
Well, and he can restore the grade to what it was. That's like an unusual situation. So it was very frustrating to me because this home that was placed then into the floodplain, the slab foundation of a walkout basement was like 12 inches higher than the ground elevation there. But that surveyor hit that and should not have submitted that Loma. Should have said, you're in by 1.2 inches. You know, maybe if the guy would have mulched before the landscaper showed up, he wouldn't have been placed in the floodplain. But so I don't know why surveyors submit sometimes. It's like they just take the numbers. They're not interpreting them and understanding them. So, all right. We have gone way too long. What is an elevation certificate? Prepared by a land surveyor, professional engineers for insurance only. Sections E and F can be now completed by the owner for all buildings. Documents the elevation of the structure compared to the flood elevation, used to apply for a LOMA, used to get the most accurate premium. It's no longer required for elevation or for quotes for flood insurance. And generally, as I mentioned, agents will ask for them even though they're not required. This is what the elevation, part of the elevation certificate looks like. And so what we have here is top of bottom floor, including basement, top of the next higher floor. This is for V zones only. It's horizontal structural members. A top of an attached garage, lowest elevation of machinery and equipment, lowest elevation or lowest adjacent grade next to the building, highest adjacent grade next to the building, and lowest grade at deck or stairs. So when a deck sometimes is cantilevered out into lower ground, that can sometimes bring a house. I'm going to show this picture. There's an example of a situation where a deck is extended out. Now this house is probably in regardless, it's right next to it, but I think I might, no I don't. So, but there are cases where I've seen now these elaborate decks are being built that are multi-stories and they extend down towards the lake. If it's bolted back into the house like a traditional deck, that will bring the house into the floodplain. So they need to be freestanding. This is that section E I mentioned that a homeowner can fill out. James Sink with FEMA did offer to help explain how a homeowner can fill it out, but basically they're going to go to their house with a measuring tape. They're going to walk around the outside, decide which point is the lowest ground next to it. They're going to take their measuring tape and measure to the top of the foundation. So they're going to kind of estimate the siding comes down maybe a couple inches over the top. They're going to measure that. Then they go into the basement, put their measuring tape at the top of the foundation and measure down to the basement floor. It's basically the two measurements that they need to be able to take or someone needs to help them take. So this kind of walks you through that and explains, I think they also want the highest adjacent grade, so whatever the highest point around the house compared to the foundation is. And I think this just says 90%, in Illinois, 92% of flood damages now are outside of the map floodplain because of urban flooding. Lots of downtown sanitary backups, problems in Chicago. 2018 University of Illinois Climate Change Study, despite better floodplain mapping and stronger regulations and proactive flood mitigation programs, flood damages due to climate change continue to increase in Illinois. Illinois has purchased close to 5,000 homes in the last 50 years and bought them out. Rainfall, annual rainfall in Illinois has now increased to about 40 inches a year, so we're up about 4.5 inches than what we were from the early 1900s. And one of the comparisons I had someone describe for the difference between climate versus weather, it's like you're walking your dog and you both make it to the same end point, like the line there, that's the sidewalk you're walking on, but your dog is going like this. So that's the annual weather. One time you're
That was
cold,
yesterday.
another time you're warm. It's, yeah, you know, it's raining a lot this year, it's dry this year, so your dog is doing that. You still make it down there, and so climate is that overall change. So climate is changing. Why it's changing, I don't care. All I know is it is changing. We see it with the birds, we see it with our plants. Flood-causing precipitation is expected to increase 31% in the upper Midwest. So those are just the summaries. All buildings are at risk of flooding if it rains enough. 17 inches in Aurora Blackberry Creek in 1996. was when that big storm came through. And so a 17-inch rainfall. I heard back then that they had second floor flooding in that section of Aurora. Only buildings in regulatory floodplain, the MAP floodplain, are required insurance by lenders. That's the federal requirement. But some lenders, it's their risk. They need to decide whether they want to require flood insurance for other riskier properties. Homeowner policies will cover basement flooding from sanitary sewers or sump pumps.
But you have to have that extra.
That rider.
You gotta have the rider.
The special rider. Urban flooding caused by storm sewer backup, street flooding, or sanitary backup is not shown on floodplain maps. Private flood insurance policies are available, but read the fine print.
Also, I did look it up, it's 100% replacement cost or the maximum coverage amount from NFIP for condo. So most condo people for their HO6 insurance, they just get 100% replacement. Especially if you're on the 20th floor, I really don't think, if that's happened, we're all just kiss your goodbye.
Yeah.
It's the day after tomorrow.
Right, yeah. So I think the key is, like, I knew in Lyle when they flooded in 2013, they had the Four Lakes apartments flooded, and the people were out of their units for a month or so, so then they had temporary living costs. I don't think any of that would be covered because they didn't have flood insurance, whereas, but I don't even know if that would be covered anyway under a flood insurance policy.
Some
But-
offer it, some don't.
Okay, then the
That's
other
a cool
thing,
thing to have.
the one thing that happened was that the refrigerator sat for a month, and so I would think they all had to toss their refrigerators. Because they only took them up 2 at a time to get their belongings since there was no elevators working, so they weren't allowed to live there until the elevators got
It's
fixed.
a hot, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know that they emptied their refrigerators in that time.
Are there any plans for local towns to create, if the map, flood maps change? I heard in Joliet they're supposed to create like a swale, so that downtown of Joliet is not supposed to be in a floodplain. Do you know of any programs or any plans?
So communities always build flood control and flood mitigation. So Addison built a huge reservoir. A lot of work is done by the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So when you're driving Interstate 80 and you cross over the big quarries, one of those lobes is called Thornton Quarry, and it fills now with water from Thorn Creek that comes out of South Holland, and it's to keep it out of the deep tunnel system, and so that fills with water, and I think deep tunnel floods into it. So, but yeah, there are reservoirs being built, flood control is done, and so local communities just need to put the design into it and the money into it. I can't think of any in Will County. Will County, unfortunately, does not have a super active stormwater management program. It's just not very proactive as the other counties are. All right. Well, thank you. You guys were all very energetic.
Thank you, guys. Amazing, man.